Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Finally, Amy Roloff is about to give birth to a new baby. Amy Roloff is expecting a new twin baby. I will explain everything. Today we are confirming the news that has been whispered about in fan forums and speculated on in hushed tones for months. We're here to tell you the full incredible story. Amy Roloff, at 62 years of age, is pregnant. And that's not all. In a twist that can only be described as a divine blessing, our sources, who are extremely close to the family, have confirmed that Amy is not just expecting one baby, but twins. The journey to this incredible moment was shrouded in the deepest secrecy, and for very good reason. To understand the gravity and the miracle of this pregnancy, we must first understand the immense risks and the profound privacy the couple felt was necessary. The first whispers began, as they so often do, with the eagle-eyed fans of Little People, Big World. Around 8 months ago, viewers on a dedicated subreddit began piecing together what they saw as clues. One fan commented, "Did anyone else notice Amy in her latest cooking video? She's only showing herself from the chest up and she's wearing a really loose apron. She also seemed a little more tired than usual, but so happy. Something's different." Another fan replied, "I thought the same thing." And in Chris's last Instagram story, you could see a book on healthy eating for two on their coffee table in the background before he quickly panned away. He deleted the story 10 minutes later, but I got a screenshot. These were, of course, just speculations, and they were often dismissed. A geriatric pregnancy, a pregnancy in a woman over the age of 35, is rare and complex. A pregnancy at 62 is, for all intents and purposes, a medical marvel. It's a 1 in a million occurrence fraught with potential complications for both mother and child. For Amy, who also has dwarfism, the risks were exponentially higher. A source very close to the couple, who spoke to us on the condition of anonymity, explained the immense pressure they were under. They were terrified, and I mean absolutely terrified. From the moment they found out, it was a mixture of pure, unadulterated joy and crippling fear. Amy's first thought wasn't, "Wow, this is amazing." It was, "Can I do this? Can my body handle this? Will the babies be okay?" The doctors were cautiously optimistic but brutally honest about the risks. The number of appointments, the specialists they had to see, it was a full-time job just managing the medical side of it. This, our source explains, is why they held the news so close. It wasn't about a big reality TV reveal. It was about protecting the fragile, precious life, or, as they would soon find out, lives, that were growing inside of her. They decided they would not make a single public acknowledgement until they had cleared every major medical hurdle and were confident that the pregnancy was viable and progressing in a healthy direction. Chris, in particular, became fiercely protective. He managed Amy's schedule, her diet, and acted as a gatekeeper to ensure she had as stress-free an environment as possible. Chris was a rock, but more than that, he was a fortress. He knew this was his one and only chance to be a biological father, and he wasn't going to let anything jeopardize it. He cooked, he cleaned, he fielded calls. He told Amy, "Your only job is to be a safe harbor for our babies." He's been dreaming of being a dad his whole life, and you could see the love and the fear and the hope all warring in his eyes every single day. They told only a tiny, trusted circle, her children, of course. And even those conversations were filled with emotion and complexity. They needed their family's support, not the world's opinion. The physical changes were becoming harder to hide. Amy stepped back from many public-facing events. Her online cooking segments became less frequent. When she did appear, she was often seated behind a kitchen island or wrapped in a cozy, oversized shawl. The fans noticed, but most attributed it to her simply enjoying a quieter life with Chris. No one dared to guess the real reason was so monumental. The true turning point, the moment they knew they might just pull off this miracle, came during the 20-week anatomy scan. They had already been through numerous tests, genetic screenings, extensive blood work, high-resolution ultrasounds. Each one was an agonizing wait for the phone to ring. But the 20-week scan was different. It was the halfway point. It was when they would get the most detailed look at their developing baby. What happened in that dark, quiet room, with the hum of the ultrasound machine filling the air, changed everything. Imagine the scene: Amy and Chris holding hands so tightly their knuckles are white. They're watching the grainy black and white image on the monitor, their hearts in their throats. The sonographer is moving the probe, taking measurements, her face a mask of professionalism. She confirms what they already knew: one healthy, strong heartbeat, a perfectly formed spine, 10 fingers and 10 toes. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brings them to tears. The doctor had given them the green light to finally be truly, openly happy. But then the sonographer paused. She moved the probe to a different angle. Her brow furrowed in concentration. According to our source, who heard the story directly from an emotional Amy, Chris was the first one to speak. He looked at the screen and whispered, "What is that? Is that another one?" She confirms what they already knew. One healthy, strong heartbeat. A perfectly formed spine. 10 fingers and 10 toes. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brings them to tears. The doctor had given them the green light to finally be truly openly happy. But then the sonographer paused. She moved the probe to a different angle, her brow furrowing in concentration. According to our source, who heard the story directly from an emotional Amy, Chris was the first one to speak. He looked at the screen and whispered, "What is that? Is everything okay?" The sonographer didn't answer immediately. She pressed the probe a little firmer against Amy's gel-slicked belly, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "Just one moment," she murmured, her voice carefully neutral. The machine continued its soft, rhythmic whooshing. The sound that had just moments before been the most beautiful music in the world now suddenly felt ominous. Amy's grip on Chris's hand tightened to the point of pain, but he didn't flinch. He was staring at the screen, at the grainy, shifting landscape of their child. He saw the tiny, flickering heartbeat, a frantic, beautiful star. And then he saw it. Another flicker, just a few centimeters away, a perfect, synchronous rhythm beating in time with the first. "Is that another heartbeat?" Chris asked, his voice barely a breath. The sonographer's furrowed brow finally relaxed, breaking into a wide, incredulous smile. She turned to look at them, her professional mask completely gone, replaced by pure wonder. "That," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "is exactly what that is." A profound silence filled the room, broken only by the dual whooshing of two separate, strong, healthy heartbeats. Amy let out a choked sound, halfway between a sob and a laugh. She looked from the screen to Chris, whose face was a canvas of utter shock. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He looked back at the screen, then at Amy, then back again as if verifying the impossible. "Twins." Amy finally managed to whisper, the word feeling foreign and monumental on her tongue. "We're having twins?" "Congratulations," the sonographer beamed. "You're having twins. Fraternal twins, by the looks of it. 2 separate sacs, 2 placentas. It's the best-case scenario for a twin pregnancy." She began pointing them out on the screen. "Baby A here is the one we've been measuring. And this little one, baby B, was hiding behind, curled up just so. They're both perfectly formed, perfect size for gestational age. This is remarkable." The relief that had momentarily vanished now returned, multiplied by a factor of 1,000,000, crashing over them in a wave so intense it was dizzying. Chris leaned over, burying his face in Amy's shoulder, his own shoulders shaking. They weren't tears of fear anymore, but of a joy so profound it was physically overwhelming. Two hearts. 2 lives. The 1 in a million miracle had just become a 1 in a billion one. The drive home was a blur. They sat in a stunned, happy silence, Chris's hand resting on Amy's knee the entire way. The world outside the car looked different, sharper, more vibrant. The green of the trees seemed greener, the sky a more brilliant blue. It was as if the entire universe had recalibrated itself around this new, astounding reality. Once home, inside the safety of their own 4 walls, the dam broke. They laughed and cried, holding each other in the middle of their living room. Chris spun Amy around gently, careful of her belly that was home to 2 babies. "Twins," he kept repeating as if trying to make the word real. We're having twins, Amy. A boy and a girl. A brother and a sister. I can feel it. The revelation brought a new, even more complex layer to their careful planning. The cautious optimism was now laced with a giddy, terrifying excitement. Their tiny trusted circle was immediately updated, and the reactions were a mirror of their own. Initial shock, followed by tears of joy, and then a swift, sobering understanding of the increased risks. A twin pregnancy at any age is considered high risk. At 62, with Amy's medical history, it was venturing into uncharted territory. The very next day, their medical team, led by the unflappable Dr. Evans, convened a new strategy meeting. The plan was overhauled. Appointments would now be weekly. Nutritional needs were recalculated. The goal weight gain was adjusted. They were referred to 2 additional specialists, a perinatologist who specialized in high-risk multiple births and a pediatric cardiologist to perform fetal echocardiograms on both babies, given the slightly increased risk of heart issues in twins. Chris's role as fortress intensified. He became a master of spreadsheets, color-coded and meticulously detailed. One tab for Amy's vitamin schedule, another for appointments and specialists, and a third for a curated high-protein meal plan designed to support a twin pregnancy. His life's purpose had narrowed and focused into a single, all-consuming goal: the health and safety of his wife and his 2 unborn children. Amy, for her part, embraced her role as the safe harbor. She listened to her body with a hyper-vigilant awareness. She napped without guilt, ate the nutrient-dense meals Chris prepared, and practiced meditation and breathing exercises her therapist recommended to manage spikes of anxiety. The love she felt was no longer abstract. It was a physical force, a fierce, protective energy that seemed to radiate from her core. She would often sit in the nursery, now nurseries under construction, her hands resting on her growing bump, and just talk to them. She'd tell them about their dad, about the family waiting to love them, about the world they were going to enter. As the weeks progressed, Amy's body changed rapidly. By 25 weeks, she was the size of a full-term singleton pregnancy. The physical strain was immense. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled, and finding a comfortable position to sleep became a nightly battle that Chris aided with a fortress of pillows. She developed symphysis pubis dysfunction, a painful condition where the pelvic joints become unstable, making every movement a careful, waddling negotiation. Chris was there for every painful step. He would massage her feet at night, help her in and out of chairs, and patiently walk with her on the slow, careful laps she took around their property to maintain circulation. His love was in his actions, in the heated blanket he pre-warmed for her, in the water bottle he kept constantly filled, in the way his eyes would light up every time she entered a room, her belly leading the way. He made her feel not like an invalid, but like a warrior, a goddess, the center of his universe. At 28 weeks, a major milestone in any pregnancy, but a monumental one in theirs, they had another detailed scan. The babies were growing at perfectly synchronized rates, both in the 55th percentile. "They're thriving, Amy," Dr. Evans said, a note of genuine awe in her voice. "Honestly, given the circumstances, this is as textbook as it could possibly be. You are doing everything right." This was the final green light they needed to finally, truly, begin to believe. The fear, while never fully gone, was now overshadowed by a solid, steady confidence. They started to allow themselves to plan, to dream in concrete terms. The spare room was officially transformed. 2 cribs were assembled side by side. Chris, who had taken up woodworking as a stress relief hobby, built a beautiful, sturdy changing table with 2 stations. They didn't know the genders. They had decided to keep that one last surprise, so the room was painted a soft, calming sage green. Tiny, neutral-colored clothes were washed and folded in the drawers. The reality of their impending parenthood was no longer a fragile secret. It was a tangible, beautiful fact. It was around this time that the outside world began to press in again. The fan speculation, once a distant murmur, had grown into a persistent rumble. A blurry long-lens photo of Amy and Chris leaving the hospital after a checkup was sold to a tabloid. The headline screamed, Amy Roloff's shocking health crisis. Is she dying? The article was cruel and wildly inaccurate, but it spooked them. It was a stark reminder that their private miracle was the world's public spectacle. Then came the interview request from a major television network. It was a respectful, generous offer, accompanied by a personal letter from a well-known anchor, a mother of twins. She praised their courage and offered them a platform to tell their story on their own terms, to control the narrative before the gossip mills spun it into something grotesque. Chris and Amy spent 3 long days discussing it. They weighed the loss of privacy against the power of sharing their truth. If we do this, Chris said one evening, his arm wrapped around her as they looked at the stars from their backyard, we do it for us. For them. He nodded toward her belly. So they have a record of how much they were wanted, how hard we fought for them. So they know their story doesn't belong to the tabloids. It belongs to us. Amy agreed. They decided they would do one interview, one carefully controlled sit-down, to be aired only after the babies were born and they were all home and safe. It would be their story, in their words. The decision felt like taking back a piece of their power. The 3rd trimester arrived with new challenges. At 32 weeks, Amy was placed on modified bed rest. Her blood pressure had begun to creep up, a common but dangerous complication in twin pregnancies known as preeclampsia. The goal was to get to 34 weeks, a crucial milestone for lung development in twins. Every day they stayed pregnant was a victory, buying the babies more time to grow and strengthen. The bed rest period was a test of endurance. Amy, always active and independent, chafed against the confinement. Chris became her everything, her chef, her nurse, her entertainment committee. He read aloud to her and the babies, everything from pregnancy books to fantasy novels. They binge-watched gentle, comforting cooking and home renovation shows. He set up a mini fridge and kettle next to the bed so she could have tea and snacks without getting up. Their world shrank to the boundaries of their bedroom, but within those walls, their bond deepened into something unbreakable. At 34 weeks and 3 days, during a routine blood pressure check at home, the numbers spiked dangerously high. A call to Dr. Evans confirmed their fears. It was time. The preeclampsia was no longer manageable at home. The babies were coming. The car ride to the hospital was nothing like the one after the anatomy scan. This was quiet, purposeful, and charged with nervous energy. Chris's jaw was set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Amy focused on her breathing, one hand on her belly, feeling the frantic, rolling movements of her 2 children, who seemed to sense the impending change. It's going to be okay, she whispered to them, to Chris, to herself. We're a team. We can do this. They were whisked into a large, bright operating room. A C-section was the only safe option given the twins and Amy's blood pressure. The room was a controlled chaos of medical personnel. 2 teams of neonatal specialists stood ready, one for each baby. The air was cool, smelling of antiseptic and anticipation. Chris, scrubbed and gowned, sat by Amy's head, holding her hand, his eyes locked on hers. Okay, Amy, Dr. Evans said, her voice calm and sure from behind the sterile drape. You're going to feel some pressure. Here we go. There was a flurry of activity, a sense of focused intensity. Amy squeezed Chris's hand, her eyes wide, looking for an anchor in his gaze. And then a thin, reedy, indignant cry. Baby A is out, a nurse announced. It's a girl. A moment later, a second, deeper cry joined the first. Baby B. It's a boy. Twin cries filled the operating room, the most beautiful, chaotic symphony either of them had ever heard. Chris and Amy looked at each other, and the tears that fell were pure, unadulterated joy. They had done it. Against every odd, through every fear, they had done it. The nurses brought the babies over, swaddled tightly in striped hospital blankets. Their daughter had a shock of dark hair and her mother's nose. Their son was fairer, with a determined little frown that was all Chris. They were small but perfectly formed, breathing on their own. As Amy nuzzled her daughter's cheek and Chris cradled his son, the world fell away. The fear, the pain, the months of secrecy and anxiety, it all melted into insignificance before the overwhelming, all-consuming love they felt for these two tiny, miraculous beings. The babies, whom they named Alara Grace and Orion James, spent the next 3 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger every day. Amy and Chris were constants by their isolettes, reading to them, singing to them, doing kangaroo care where the babies slept skin to skin on their chests. The NICU journey was its own roller coaster, but it was a journey they faced together as a family. The day they finally brought Alara and Orion home was the day their new life truly began. The house, once a sanctuary of quiet secrecy, was now filled with the sounds of their new reality: soft gurgles, hungry cries, the rustle of tiny sleepers. They were exhausted, but it was an exhaustion filled with purpose and profound happiness. A few weeks later, on a sunny afternoon, they filmed the interview. Sitting together on their sofa, with Alara sleeping in Amy's arms and Orion dozing on Chris's chest, they told their story. They spoke of the terror and the joy, the medical marvels and the private struggles. They didn't shy away from the fear, but let the world see the love that ultimately conquered it. When the segment aired, the public reaction was not one of scandal or disbelief, but of an outpouring of support and shared joy. Their story became less about a medical anomaly and more about the universal power of hope, love, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. That evening, after the world had seen their truth, Chris and Amy stood together in the doorway of the nursery. The moon cast a soft light over the two cribs where their children slept peacefully. Chris wrapped his arms around Amy from behind, his hands resting over hers on her now soft belly, the harbor that had safely carried their miracles. "We did it," he whispered into her hair. Amy leaned back into his embrace, watching the gentle rise and fall of two tiny chests. The journey had been longer and more complex than they could have ever imagined, leading them to a destination more beautiful than they had ever dared to dream. "Yes," she said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable peace. "We did." "Yes," she said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable peace. "We did." The silence that settled over the house in the weeks that followed was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of a secret being kept, nor the sterile quiet of a hospital room. This was a warm, living quiet, punctuated and defined by the soft, primal sounds of their new family, the hiccup-like sighs of a sleeping newborn, the gentle creak of a rocking chair, the hungry, rooting cries that were swiftly answered. It was a symphony of intimacy, and Chris and Amy were its devoted conductors. The initial newborn fog was, for them, a period of intense, cocooned adjustment. Chris's spreadsheets evolved from tracking medical appointments to logging feedings, diaper changes, and sleep patterns for two separate, tiny humans. Alara, it turned out, was a champion sleeper, capable of dozing for 3-hour stretches with the placid demeanor of a sunbathing cat. Orion, however, was more vigilant. He preferred to sleep in short, intense bursts and was often awake, his wide, dark eyes taking in the shadows of the nursery with a serious, contemplative expression that made Chris laugh. "He's making sure I assembled that crib correctly," he'd whisper to Amy, who would smile, her eyes heavy with sleep. Amy's recovery was slow and required patience. Her body, having been pushed to its absolute physiological limit, now demanded rest with the same insistence as her newborns. The preeclampsia symptoms subsided, but the fatigue was bone deep. She learned, slowly, to accept help not just from Chris, but from the small, trusted circle they had leaned on for so long. Her adult children began to visit, their initial complex emotions having long since melted into awe and a fierce, protective love for their new half-siblings. The first visit from Zach and his family was a moment Amy had privately dreaded and eagerly anticipated. She watched as her eldest son, a father himself, knelt before the two bassinets in the living room. His large, gentle hand reached out and carefully, with infinite tenderness, stroked Alara's cheek. The baby stirred, her tiny fingers curling around the tip of his finger. "Hey there, little sister," Zach whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked up at Amy, his eyes shining. "Mom, they're perfect." In that moment, a final, lingering thread of anxiety within Amy snapped. This was her family. It was messy, it was unconventional, it was bigger than she had ever planned, but it was whole. As the babies grew stronger, so did their individual personalities. Elara, with her dark hair and rosebud mouth, possessed a surprisingly mighty lungs and a clear, demanding cry when she was hungry. She was a creature of immediate needs and deep, satisfying slumbers. Orion was more observant, quieter. He would lie on his activity mat, content to watch the spinning toys, his little legs kicking slowly. He saved his biggest, gummest smiles for his sister, often cooing in her direction as if they shared a secret language forged in the womb. Chris was a natural father. The fear that had once weighed in his eyes was now entirely replaced by a calm,